Good morning. Good morning. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Tomorrow, our government will begin a productive legislative session focused on the most pressing issue facing Alberta, which is, of course, the economy. Over the next few months, our government will continue to set its sights on job creation and promoting economic development, diversification, and getting a pipeline built to Tidewater. For decades, governments in Alberta have failed to diversify the economy, and the province remained dependent on the non-renewable energy sector for revenue and for job creation. Our government is determined to do better. This involves help for the Alberta families who have been hit the hardest by the economic downturn, those families who've lost jobs and are worried about where their next paycheck will come from. The economic downturn hurting all of Canada reminds us of the critical necessity to diversify our economy so that we are less vulnerable to commodity prices that we don't control. Through the Ministry of Economic Development and Diversification, we've already taken steps to begin addressing the problem. Our next session will expand on this work, which you will hear more about in tomorrow's throne speech. Our caucus and cabinet have planned for a robust legislative session, including legislation related to the implementation of our climate leadership plan, as well as the recommendations that came forward through the royalty review. Our government will be focusing on partnerships that will work to create new jobs and diversification in the energy industry. We will also promote value-added enterprise and are going to forge ahead on energy infrastructure that will enable us to access new markets. Getting a pipeline to Tidewater has been a focus of our government since our first day, and it's a priority that we will continue to pursue with focus and determination. Of course, in early April, Minister Ceci will unveil a budget which looks closely at managing our finances while protecting services Alberta families need most. He will support training and education to ensure young people are ready to join the workforces and that Albertans can upgrade their skills in challenging times. The budget will continue our plan to create jobs and diversify the economy, and it will focus on stability while tackling some serious economic challenges. I think at the point we will see a big contrast between our plan and the agendas of the opposition, who would make cuts that would hurt families and the economy. We don't believe the answer to our economic downturn is to cut vital services and lay off teachers and nurses. And we don't believe the answer is to invest less in roads, schools, hospitals, or other important infrastructure. Albertans elected us to protect and invest in the services that they rely on. They also elected us as a new and modern voice to represent their interests. We'll be taking action to modernize certain aspects of governance in Alberta, including amending the Legislative Assembly Act to address the issue of MLAs not being able to miss sittings due to pregnancy or care for newborns. We will introduce legislation that will support our goal of modernizing and streamlining the vast number of agencies, boards, and commissions to ensure their role and composition are reflective of the needs of Albertans today. We also plan to introduce essential services legislation so that Alberta can comply with recent rulings by the Supreme Court of Alberta and Alberta's Court of Queen's Bench, which invalidated existing provincial labour legislation. This is a unique time in Alberta's history, and it's time to build a path forward. We will take decisive action this session to build a stronger, more resilient, prosperous Alberta for years to come. I want to thank you all for being here, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Minister, so in total, about how many pieces of legislation are we expecting here? 5 or 6, I think you referred to?
There will be more that you can, we'll hear about in the speech from the throne tomorrow. It's going to be a robust session. It will start, of course, tomorrow on the 8th of March. We expect it will go through into June. Hopefully, given harmony and light in the Assembly on the part of the government and the opposition parties, we would hope to be out of here by the 2nd of June, but it may go longer.
Did you say, Minister,
So,
ABCs? I'm sorry.
ABCs, yes. So there will be a robust legislative agenda. You'll learn more of tomorrow in this speech from the throne. No, not a specific date, but as Mr. Ceci has indicated, it'll be in the first 2 weeks of April.
What did you say you were doing, Minister, on the ABCs? Is there going to be a report then in terms of what?
Yes, there is. We've been doing quite a bit of work on that, sorting through that. I think there's over 200 of them. So reducing them where we can, consolidating, eliminating ones that don't really serve any real function.
We're going to see that plan in terms of
Yes,
what boards
yes,
are
that
gonna
will be
get.
part of the agenda. Some of that has to be, changes have to be made legislatively.
You mentioned the pipelines to Tidewater. Is there anything you can do during the session towards that?
Well, I think specifically what we can do is focus on our plans for diversification and the climate change piece, of course. Actual negotiations with respect to pipelines, I think, are conducted outside the Assembly.
Right. So but you've mentioned that several times. as to
It's a
what-
high priority for the government, and, we'll see reference to that, I'm sure, in some of the pieces of legislation around the diversification of the economy.
You wanted a more family-friendly legislature, but last sitting, you end up sitting morning, noon, and night. How do you avoid that? Is that going to just be the goodwill of the opposition?
I
and-
think you can put that question to the next person to get up here.
Well, I think, as House Leader, what can you do to that?
I think there's a number of things. We do want to avoid the night sittings wherever possible. However, when we're faced with, filibusters, when we're faced with lack of cooperation on the part of the opposition, which is their right, which is their job, then sometimes that has to give. And last time, I think it gave more than we wanted it to.
At what point, though, do you limit the use of night sittings? Because as it stands, and when the opposition has an issue with a piece of legislation, what happens is you do sit morning, noon,
Yes.
and night, and
Yeah.
people are in the legislature until 11 o'clock or midnight,
Yes,
day
yeah,
after day.
yeah.
At what point do you rein that in somehow?
Well, we'll try and rein it in wherever we can. But we still have to get our legislative agenda through the session. So it really is, I think, a question of how we can work together with the opposition parties to get the legislative agenda through. If they strongly disagree with a piece of legislation, it's their right and their job to delay it, and we understand that. So we'll just work the best way we can to try and make sure that we get the pieces of legislation through the Assembly without involving night sittings where possible.
We're going to
Getting
take a
back
couple
to, sorry,
questions from the
just
phone line
getting back to
next.
the idea of diversifying the economy.
Yeah.
What are you actually doing during the session towards that goal?
Well, we'll be legislating with respect to that question, right?
Give me an idea what you'd be doing then.
No, I can't. You have to wait for the speech from the throne. But there will be legislation, Graham, with respect to that.
Operator, can you take the next question?
It's from Don Braid, Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Minister, by the time we see the budget, are we going to know full details of the carbon tax, which will, I think, be implemented in 2017? Are we going to know what kind of tax there is going to be on each sector at the pumps and whatever else you're planning to do? Will we get those details? And secondly, just as a follow-up, TransAlta canceled a bunch of coal purchase contracts, 3 major coal purchase contracts today, saying the cause is the climate change policy and government policy and so forth. I just wonder what your response would be to that.
Well, with respect to that, of course, our goal is to phase out the use of coal in the province for electricity generation more quickly than had been previously agreed by the federal and the previous provincial government. So I guess that's consistent. In terms of your question about the Climate Leadership Plan Implementation Act, I can actually give you a little bit of information there. It will enact the levy. It will provide for rebates to individuals and to small business. It will create a new energy efficiency agency, and it will empower the allocation of money to other envelopes.
The individual person, the taxpayer is going to get a fair idea where and what is going to cost them more and know what they're going to get back.
I believe so, yes. Yeah, the legislation will cover those things.
And it will take effect on January 1st, 2017, is that your plan?
That's my understanding.
No changes, Minister, in terms of how much is going to be collected, or?
No.
Are you overhauling the Labor Act in this session, or is that likely to happen in the fall?
I don't believe that that's going to be part of the agenda. There is essential services legislation, which I mentioned. Beyond that, I don't expect there'll be anything along those lines in this spring session.
Will there be legislation regarding the ABCs?
Yes.
Or can-
Yes. Some of those changes have to be made legislatively.
And you said streamline them, can you give us a better idea? Are you talking about eliminating some of them, or?
Yes. Yeah, those that we consider no longer necessary will be eliminated altogether. Others will be consolidated, and a number will be retained.
Do the ABCs that are going to be eliminated, do they know yet, or will they find out the day that's?
I don't really know the answer to that question. I think that's, I only have one ABC in my two ministries, which is the Transportation Safety Board, which is going to remain, but I don't know what communication other ministers may have had with their ABCs.
Any changes to the government's job creation plans? No, the job creation plans. You know, that last year,
Yeah.
you brought in that idea to try and give money to companies that hire people.
Yes, no, I don't think so.
We're going back to the phone lines again. Operator, can you take the next question?
Next question comes from James Wood, Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, Minister Mason. I wanted to ask you about the essential services legislation. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how the government is approaching this philosophically? Are you trying to capture as many people as possible under as essential services, or are you going to be trying to take as minimal an approach?
Well, the most important thing is to conform with the rulings from the courts and make sure that our legislation meets those tests. With respect to the rest, I would suspect that we will be trying to focus on people who are truly essential and to provide arrangements for the provision of services in the event of a labor action.
And can I just follow up? I wanted to ask you, how is the government going to be approaching the various negotiations that it has underway, and given that people will now have the right to strike that didn't previously, how much concern should there be about potential job action in this tough financial time that's ahead?
I think that's really above my pay grade to answer. I think that you should wait for the speech from the throne and ask questions with respect to that from the Labour Minister. I can't really speculate on the future of labor relations in this very difficult economic climate. All I know is that I believe that all parties are prepared to enter into this in good faith, and that's my belief.
Operator, can you take the next question?
Next question comes from Don Braid from the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hello again. I just wanted to ask you, the last session turned very acrimonious despite all the sweetness and light in your throne speech, which I was, of course, rereading last night for the 50th time from last June.
That's 49 more than me.
And even you ended up apologizing, Minister. We hadn't heard that one before. Do you expect worse, because the opposition through Bill 6 and through the fiscal crisis and everything has been pretty ferocious, and everything seems to be escalating. Do you expect that kind of session, and if so, do you plan to do anything about it or try to?
Well, I hope not. I think we always start with the best of intentions, and it certainly would be our view to try and calm things down a little bit. I think you can maybe ask some of the opposition House leaders that question as well and get their take.
We'll take a couple more from the floor. Dean, you're next.
Oh, so you mentioned something about putting some legislation forward on maternity leave for city
Yeah.
members. Can you
Yeah.
just describe what exactly it is you're doing there?
Well, it will deal with the question of MLAs who may be pregnant or have newborn infants, and how they will function in terms of leave, maternity leave, provisions like that, and that's the basis of it.
Why do you need legislation for that? Because I guess if they're absent from the House for a certain stretch, then penalties kick in or something?
That's correct. That's correct. Right now, there are very limited criteria for missing session, and they include illness and so on. And I think the point's been made, and very correctly, that pregnancy is not an illness, motherhood is not an illness, and so we need to make provision for that.
You
make it
mentioned,
retroactive?
sorry, you mentioned trying to get things more, sorry, your question was on the same?
Will you make it retroactive, the legislation, with respect to maternity leave?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'll get it for you.
So you mentioned things getting, maybe, you're hoping things get better in the House, but you're gonna have a by-election, it's on right now, when the
Yeah.
House is sitting. How is that gonna affect the House, do you think?
Well, I think we'll all want to be on our best behavior in order to impress the voters.
Right, last question.
Tomorrow's the deadline for the report on the media and the legislature. Is that coming forward in the next few days?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think Darcy got
Yeah.
cut off. Can we just take one from him?
Yeah, I was wondering who did the ABC report. Is that internal?
It's been an ongoing process of the entire government. All ministers have been involved in this, and we've been meeting in order to make these changes. Right? It's not an outside study. It's us working to reduce unnecessary duplication amongst boards and committees.
Is it over now, or is it still ongoing?
I don't think it's going to be completely over. No.
Is there a target?
No, I think there's always a good role to play in terms of reviewing that to make sure we've got the right mix and that we don't have unnecessary appointments. There was a real proliferation of these boards and committees in the past, and I think we don't need all of them, and it's something worth reviewing on an ongoing basis.
Is there a target for how much you want to save on these ABCs?
I don't have the answer to that.
The third quarter report had, they reprofiled some of the road projects, I think, extended the timelines.
Yeah.
Will we see more of that, and are you gonna look at the next budget reprofiling some more of your capital projects?
I would expect so.
In terms of, again, just the roads, or maybe some of the schools?
Well, I mean, we're always taking a look, and some of the reprofiling is simply because there were construction delays, and we didn't spend all of the money this year. We carried forward to the next year, so we finished the project. So it's a complicated thing. And
Sounds more housekeeping though than trying.
well,
to
it's fairly common in government, and we're actually watching that to make sure that we don't exceed sort of what the average is, because the budget should be the budget. But there's always in capital projects the need to carry over, or sometimes you bring something in sooner than you expected, and then you reprofile backwards.
Minister, what's the status of the infrastructure sunshine list?
That'll be coming forward.
This session?
I think so, yes, part of the capital plan. That was a lot harder than it looked.
And are you expecting more money from the feds for infrastructure on top of the 700 million that's been pledged?
We are very hopeful, and we've got some encouraging signals from the federal government that there will in fact be significant infrastructure money coming our way. As you know, the federal platform of the Liberal government in Ottawa was to put $60 billion in increased infrastructure spending over 10 years, and we would certainly expect Alberta will get its share. And we're having ongoing discussions with respect to that, and Minister Sohi and I are talking about that.
All right.
Good, thanks very much.
Thank you.